Showcase Chicago.
From Chicago, this is Bruce Dumont with our weekly Beyond the Beltway analysis of national politics, featuring occasional injections of rumor and innuendo, all offered up by a panel of political insiders, pundits, power brokers, public servants, and plain-speaking Americans from coast to coast. Tonight's program is coming to you from our home base at the Museum of Broadcast Communications in the Chicago Cultural Center on Michigan Avenue, and thank you very much for joining us tonight. It's great to have you with us for this recorded edition of our program, and we are very pleased to welcome to these microphones a man who we talk about on this program and have talked about on this program for a long, long time, one of the most significant figures in the latter part of the 20th century. When they write the history books, this man's name will be in it, Ross Perot. Mr. Perot, thank you very much for joining us on Beyond the Beltway. And as the originator of Beyond the Beltway analysis, we thank you very much for joining us here in Chicago tonight.
Well, thank you, and I'm just pleased to know there is life beyond the Beltway because there are days when we wonder, so that's great.
You said today during a speech at the Executives Club at the Hilton and Towers, you talked about propaganda tricks, and you were talking about the theatrics of politics, and you also talked a little bit about the Sunday morning shows and what happens on those programs and what perhaps doesn't get discussed on those programs, and I'm wondering if you could elaborate a little bit for us this evening.
You need to understand, folks, that life that you live and the life that you live in your jobs and at work and in your businesses is based on rational behavior. You have generally accepted ethical standards. You have to produce results. If you just went out and did magic acts, illusions, and theater, you'd all be broke. And let's go to Washington now, and this is based on 4 years of experience. Politics is a combination of a magic act, now you see it, now you don't, and it's Hollywood theater at its finest. If you wonder what I'm talking about, let's go to the State of the Union message. Broadway never put on a better show. The Democrats openly talk about the fact that they wrote the speech early, they sent it across the country and had focus groups test it. They got everything out of it that was controversial. If you listen to it, it sounded like Ronald Reagan's Morning in America speech. Then they had the president rehearse it all afternoon in an auditorium, and then that night it was showtime. Now, let's go back through it. The first thing you saw was the Supreme Court justices coming into this great theater called the House of Representatives in their robes. Then you saw our military heroes with their medals, and then you saw our cabinet members. Then you saw Mrs. Clinton with her group of heroes of people who'd done incredible things. And then the president was late. Now, that is Broadway at its best. Build suspense. Is he coming? Isn't he coming? And suddenly he shows up and the crowd erupts.
The star of the show.
Now, then he starts to speak. And behind him, you see two people. One is Vice President Gore, and the other is Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. And the average American sitting out there saying, dang, old Newt doesn't look too good. Newt didn't have on any makeup. The president and vice president were made up in a way that Hollywood could not have improved, and the contrast was interesting. So, folks, I want you to get the first point. What does wearing makeup have to do with anything? It works. That's why they do it. You ought to be a lot shrewder than just say, man, these guys look beautiful, that guy looks like we do. Then, did you notice, and this can't be done in Broadway, at the end of virtually every sentence, the president got applause. The next time you watch one of these speeches, notice that Al Gore would start applauding. He would tell the Democrats when to applaud, and that controlled the applause. Then the Republicans, by and large, weren't applauding, but most of the TV cameras stayed on those who were applauding. Then after President Clinton finished his speech, we had Bob Dole in an empty room by himself with no cheering audience, no military heroes, no cabinet members, no justices of the Supreme Court. And the general reaction across the country, well, Bob Dole's speech was not exciting as the president. William Jennings Bryan, or whoever our greatest orator ever, couldn't go into an empty room and compete with the show they just saw.
What does it say about those of us in the audience when those things become important to us? I mean, we're falling for this theater.
That's because nobody's explained it to us. That's the reason I do explain it. And the thing that I love is once good, decent people who make the world go around, the electricians, the plumbers, the farmers, the truck drivers, once you say, now, watch all this, every time you see them from that point on, they've got 40 things they've noticed that I haven't noticed. And the most exciting thing that's happened in the last 4 years to me is I was outside Boston in a big seminar on campaign finance reform. Over 1,000 people showed up, and these were just good, ordinary working people. But what they knew about the details of all these issues would really have excited you.
You did say something about the Sunday morning shows. You said watch the
Sunday morning
sponsors.
shows.
It's the ADM network. What does that mean? What signal does that send?
We have one company that really invests heavily in those shows, runs beautiful ads on those shows, has had a huge amount of publicity about giving pragmatically huge sums of money to both parties, so they've hedged their bets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you look at who gets to appear on those shows most frequently, and you find that interesting in terms of the correlation between who they give money to. You just need to understand the system, folks. Then you put it all in perspective. You'll see who gets royal treatment. You'll see who gets their teeth kicked in. And you will start to understand how the system works. And then you won't be so naive. Now, right now, all of us are very naive.
What does it say about the companies, though? Because in a couple of cases, you have companies that have government contracts that happen to own networks.
Well,
it's not good?
It's just,
should we not let it happen, or should we just be aware of it?
I'd say in a free society, what you have to do is just be street smart and have common sense. You know, as I say, we need more Rhodes Scholars in this country. That's ROAD scholars, folks. Folks are street smart with common sense. And when you see something odd happening, you're plenty smart enough to figure it out if you think about it. But one of the problems with television, for example, in radio, you have to use your mind to create an image of what you hear. Radio makes your brain work. Television lets everything go into coast and neutral because you've got a picture, you've got sound, you don't have to use your mind. That's the reason it's so bad for children to see too much television. They need to be working their minds. When I was a child and I would hear the Superman and the Lone Ranger shows and what have you, the serials, I had a mental picture of all that in my head. My brain was racing. If I watched a movie like that or a television show like that, I just sit there and it all happens. That's one of the problems. So I would say that you've got to understand all this, and then you own this country. Its future is in your hands. The people in Washington are your servants. I know that's hard to believe because they're flying around in 747s, which they don't need, and you're catching the bus to work. But you let that happen. You say, who's the villain? You're the villain. I'm the villain. We own the country. They work for us. You got to get like Joe Friday, just the facts, ma'am. We'll straighten it out.
You said today that a recent poll suggested that a substantial number of Americans do not trust the government anymore. That's a significant change from where attitudes were 30 years ago.
In 1964, over 70% of the people trusted our government. And in 1994, it was down to 19%. In your business or in your personal life, if only 19% of the people trusted you, you'd be out of business. Our primary, and you don't ever hear this from Washington, before we will ever fix anything else, we've got to restore trust and confidence in our government. There's only one way to do that, and that is for our government to earn it. That's the only way you get trust and respect, is to earn it.
Okay. On that note, we're going to pause. I'm Bruce Dumont from Beyond the Beltway in Chicago. Back with more of Ross Perot in a couple of minutes.
In 1992, I almost lost my husband, John. I almost lost him to cancer. I was scared, but I knew I couldn't lose hope. I had to be strong for John.
Then John found Cancer Treatment Centers of America, where he received an individualized treatment plan, which included comprehensive medical care, nutritional, psychological, and spiritual support.
They treated us like family, and that was really important to both of us. Today my cancer's in remission, and we're going on with our lives together forever.
Find out how Cancer Treatment Centers of America can help you. If you or someone you love has cancer, call Cancer Treatment Centers of America today at 1-800-515-0176. 1-800-515-0176.
Everybody on the floor, stand by. Okay, you too? Or mic is up.
A two-alarm fire sent 4 people to the hospital in suburban Montana.
Back to the city council where there is war on crime and a war on drugs.
At the Museum of Broadcast Communications, you can anchor your own newscast. A video cassette of it can be yours for only $19.95. For more info, visit the Museum of Broadcast Communications at Chicago's Cultural Center or call 629-6000.
I don't say this to many people, but the job we do is the most important job I can think of.
Okay, guys, listen up.
I mean, there's no such thing as a B-plus mechanic on this airline.
Let's do it. Let's go.
Even the most junior mechanic can keep an airplane in this hangar if there's a hint of a problem. You might think a job like this would become routine, but every now and then, I just take a walk through the terminal. And right there, you see what's important.
Good afternoon, officer. It's my license and registration. Cheeseburger? It's hot out today, huh, officer? Maybe my tail light's out.
Shouldn't you be
Carpooling. I guess you're right.
I guess I am.
Carpooling can save up to 600,000 gallons of gas a year. This message sponsored by Ad Council and Earthshare.
From the Museum of Broadcast Communications at the Chicago Cultural Center, I'm Bruce Dumont. Thank you very much for joining us on Beyond the Beltway tonight. And our special guest is Ross Perot. And before the break, you were talking about trust and lack of trust that many have in their government. And you were beginning to talk about ways in which that trust can be rebuilt. How do you do it? First of all, it's not easy.
All right. The most fragile thing in the world is trust and respect. You have to get up every morning and re-earn it every day. We're going to have to do several things. Number one, we've got to have campaign finance reform because now the special interests control the campaigns, not the voters. We've got to have ethics reform in Congress and the White House. They say, oh, we did that. No, those were rules. We need laws with penalties. Rules, maybe you get a slap on the wrist in a back closet somewhere. We want laws, and we want people to come to serve our country and not to cash in while they're in office or after they leave. Now, one of the most pathetic examples I can give you is former presidents who travel around the world making 20-minute speeches and getting $2 million. One just came back from Vietnam, got 6 figures, won't say how much. You say, well, what difference does it make they're out of office? 2 things bother me and bother most Americans. People out there stringing wire, people out there fixing roads are paying taxes to support former presidents in a regal lifestyle so they never have to compromise their ethics and integrity. Now, that's if they don't want that, then here's the real part. Excuse me 1 minute.
Okay.
The worst thing is they are out of office, but it sends a terrible message to people who are in office and people who will be in office in the future where the pot of gold is. And you can't be a good president if you're pandering to certain foreign countries who are going to make you rich when you leave. That has got to be fixed. So campaign finance reform and ethics reform, get that
But where do you begin
out.
the reform? Specifically, give us a specific reform or two that you would like to...
Well, campaigns last too long. That's the reason they're so expensive. People all over Europe elect candidates in far less than 2 years. Our campaigns now last 2 years.
Should there be free TV time?
Absolutely, but let me just go through the list here. Let's shorten it, then that makes it less expensive. Then let's have the polls open on Saturday and Sunday. Let's stop voting on Tuesday when working people can't get to the polls. Now, no matter what your religion is, you can vote Saturday or Sunday and not interfere with your religious beliefs.
That'll help turnout.
Then we get a turnout. In Europe, some places, turnout's 90%. In Iowa the other day, it was 18%. That's inexcusable for only 18% of the owners to show up for a critical vote. Now we're making it shorter. We're making it easier for people to vote. Then we feel that everybody running for the House and Senate the House should have to raise all their money within their district. Talk about a conflict of interest. A guy gets elected from a remote rural area in Wyoming, gets on the banking committee, and banks all over the world give him money. No way for anybody to compete with him.
Right.
Go back home. Remember the old movie, Shane, Come Home? This will bring them home. Come home to get the money.
Same thing with the Senate.
Senate from their
Same
state.
thing, okay.
Then you put, now we've shortened the time frame, it takes less money. Then the airwaves do belong to the people. The airwaves were given to the TV network, to the TV stations. They don't pay anything for them. It's not unrealistic to smile nicely and say you need to provide time during the campaigns so that the candidates have a voice. That could be done. Nobody wants to touch it, though, because the TV stations and raise Cain with them, give them bad press.
Mandatory.
Et cetera. And if you don't
But
like
again, is this something...
all that can, put that all together and you got your campaign reform.
If you're in a situation right now where there is a determination being made right now by Congress as to whether or not they're going to charge a spectrum fee to stations, is this part of that trade-off?
Yes.
That maybe they're going to get it for nothing, but they've got to give something back to the politicians?
Well, that is a poor way to do business. Let's assume you have something very valuable, and I knock on your door and say, would you give it to me for nothing? Well, you'd just say, Ross, why would you even bring it up? I'm going to get a fair price for it. Who owns these airwaves? The American people own the airwaves. Congress gives them away. They're worth billions. The cellular phone circuits that were sold at deep discounts and buried in GATT and on and on and on so nobody would see it. This is what's got to be cured to restore trust and respect in Washington.
Now, if we're giving free TV time, who gets it? You obviously don't want just the Republicans and Democrats to get it. You earned your place at the table.
People who are qualified candidates should get a hearing. Now, you have to understand there's something called a Federal Election Commission, which really diminishes trust and respect of the people because half the commissioners are Democrats, half the commissioners are Republicans, and you would not want to be trying to create a third party with those two guys chasing you, and you would not be wanting to campaign as an independent with those guys chasing you. And it is a fascinating experience to see how the parties lock everything up. Every state house is controlled by Democrats or Republicans. When you try to form a third party, you have to do it state by state. I'd rather go across the Bosnian minefields. I'll tell you what's fascinating when you see how corrupt the process is. I think it's bizarre that we send poll watchers all over the world to help underdeveloped countries. I think we ought to borrow some from Haiti for the '96 election. I mean, because the process needs to be cleaned up. This is all trust and respect.
What is your timetable for the Reform Party? You're out. You're getting a petition. You're on the ballot in what, 4 or 5 states right now?
Well, we've gotten all the petitions in 7 states. They're playing games with us in some of the states. We'll win those games because we kept copies of everything we turned in. And people are now finding things that they couldn't find earlier now that we have copies. Then we took the state's computerized list and ran them against our list, proved we had more than enough. And believe it or not, in the state of Maine, they said, well, you did everything right, but we counted wrong, so you can't do it. So now we're going to the federal court. I can't wait to get in federal court and we're going to depose all these people that were part of the crooked stuff. Mm-hmm. I can't wait to lay all those cards on the table.
So you're definitely going to be a third choice.
Absolutely. We'll create a party that belongs to the people because 62% of the people, a majority of the voters, want a new party.
Now, at what point does that party determine who its standard bearer will be?
All right. We will have a process where anybody that gets 10% of the people who sign the petitions to create the new party to put them on the ballot can be a candidate. That person has to sign a written pledge not to engage in negative politics. And if he or she does, they're dropped off the ballot the next day.
Would you sign that pledge?
Absolutely. Then, but the point is, you have to sign that pledge. We're going to discuss the issues. Then we're going to have a national convention that will be very different from these circuses they put on, the two parties do.
Showbiz.
We will put on and have auditoriums all across the country. We'll have a central meeting place, but we'll satellite it up and it'll be brought down to the auditorium. So you can walk down to the street with your ballot, which you've gotten because you stood out in the cold and got the petition signed or signed one. You hear all the people present their views. Then you select the person that you feel will be the best presidential candidate.
Who are you going to invite to this convention?
All of the people who participated in forming the party.
No, those, Ross, that would like to speak. How are you going to
Well, they have to
get
10% of the people who signed petitions to put them on the ballot. keep in mind, let's assume you're ill.
Will you personally be one of those names that will be petitioned?
No, my job is to create the party. Then we'll get the petition signers.
But no one will be going out with your name on a petition so that you would be one of maybe 5 or 6 people that would then vie for this nomination.
Now, if you understand politics, and you do, by the time we get this party created, I'll be cut up beyond recognition. We're not doing this just for a fire drill. We're doing this to win.
But you're not going to.
We need a fresh new face, and they will be there, and it will be great.
But you're not going to be cut up by the people that are out there getting the petitions signed.
No, by the 2 parties who don't want it. See, the 2 parties don't want this. Excuse me, the Democrats.
What are they going to do to you that they haven't already done?
Well, they can repeat it. That's about it. Pretty soon they're going to run out of stuff, but that's all they know to do. All they know to do is just to try to destroy people rather than deal with the country's problems. So you live with that. Stay with me a minute. There's one key thing here. Since 62% of the people want a new party, that's a majority of the vote. So we can elect our next president. But more importantly, we're going to be the swing vote in every House and Senate race. We're going to identify that member of Congress or that person running for Senate who is totally committed to the reforms and changes necessary to make the 21st century the best in our history, and we will endorse that person, and we can be the swing vote. And if anybody questions that, we were the swing vote in '94. All the facts show that. The reason the Republicans got in power was because the independents put the Republicans in to give them a chance. They didn't have the votes to get there. The independent voters did it. Now then, the independent voters haven't been organized. This is really important, Bruce. Let's assume you've got 11 genius football players. I've got 11 average football players, but your guys have such big egos they won't practice. I'll beat them in the game. See, the independent voters were never organized. Now the independent voters will be organized, and we can make this change like that.
So the real purpose, what I'm hearing you say, is that the real purpose of a presidential national effort is an effort for mobilization.
Yes.
When the real bang for the buck, if you will, is going to take place in 435 congressional districts.
And the White House.
And the White House.
So that you have, instead of having train wrecks, government shutdowns, and all of this junk we've seen, we'll have people working carefully, thoughtfully, and rationally, designing and engineering solutions to these problems.
Give us a profile, if you will, of the candidate that you would like to see emerge from this Reform Party process.
A person of great principle, a person of strong beliefs, a person who doesn't have to take polls to figure out what they believe in, a person who's willing to stand out there on the point and take the heat for things that have to be done, a person that will tell the people the truth, a person who is dedicated to the future of this country, and a person who understands there's not going to be anything in it for him or her. They are coming to serve the people and not cash in now or later. I'm just defining, I guess, old Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. Maybe that's the best way I can say it. People of great principle. We have them, and they're in Congress, too.
Who are they?
Oh, we've got great people.
Can you name just a few?
Yes, but I hate to because I'll leave someone out. But
your name would be on that list.
No. Let's go to.
But would it?
Let me give you.
You're not touting it. I'm asking the question. You have described it as you mentioned every attribute. Every one of those attributes is what somebody could say about Ross Perot. You've done all those things.
But there are thousands of people in this country that could do this, that will do this because of their commitment to this country. I want people to come into politics because they love their country and they come to serve their country. And if it should be a sacrifice. Everybody that wears the uniform of the armed services makes a sacrifice, and that can be their lives, not just their time.
Mm-hmm.
If all you ask people in public life to do is time and reputation, because they tend to destroy anybody that's in public life. That still beats getting killed in combat.
Mm-hmm. Ross Perot is our guest tonight on Beyond the Beltway. I'm Bruce Dumont. Thank you very much for joining us, and we will be back with more questions for Ross Perot, the head of the Reform Party, when we continue from the Chicago Cultural Center.
Sometimes we feel like talking, and sometimes not. Ameritech caller ID can help. Just watch.
Caller ID from Ameritech lets you answer now or call back later.
You want to talk to your Aunt Betty? Not at this particular moment.
Call now and try caller ID free for 30 days. Because as much as we love our Aunt Betty's, sometimes we just don't want to talk.
What a week.
Caller ID lets you decide when to take a call. And when you buy a caller ID display, it helps you return calls by remembering the names and numbers of your last 60 callers. If you call Ameritech, you can try caller ID service free for 30 days. It's just one of the ways Ameritech can make your life simpler, and it's free, if you call now.
Ameritech, your link to better communication.
Gee, Vince, what kind of dummy wouldn't know how to use a child safety seat?
Beats me, lad. It's child's play.
You just buckle him in.
Unless he's over 20 pounds.
Then this one's good.
Except if he's over 40 pounds.
Then you're into this kind of rig.
What if he outgrows that?
Put him in a booster seat?
What if he's too big for a booster seat?
Would he use the safety belt?
The Auto Safety Hotline can tell you everything you need to know about keeping your child safe in a car.
I'm a wreck.
Totaled.
You could learn a lot from a dummy. Call 1-800-424-9393.
Who is that swimming?
You're doing good, Al.
I'm swimming.
Try to get your legs up.
Like this?
Yeah, legs flat.
That's the way. Where's your kicking, Al?
That's right.
That's it. I'm almost there.
Okay.
I'm almost there, Mommy. I'm almost there. Whoa, you made it all the way.
If you don't stop your friend from driving drunk, who will?
Good job.
Do whatever it takes.
Are you having a good time? Yeah.
Your child out here unprotected? Never. Neither would you forget his baby shots. Yet nearly a third of our babies' lives are on the line. Because even with regular doctor visits, they haven't had all their shots. Ask your doctor. Your baby needs at least 11 shots by age 2. Please don't leave him out there alone. 11 shots by 2. How sure are you?
Chicago's got it in the bag.
Hey, Chicago, are you hip? We've got it in the bag. Blue Bag Recycling, the easiest way to recycle ever. Just put all your bottles, cans, and plastic containers in one blue bag, all your newspapers and magazines in another. Then put them both out with the regular trash. We'll take it from there. Got it? Get on it. Blue Bag Recycling.
Chicago's got it in the bag. Wow!
Bruce Dumont back. Thank you very much for joining us on Beyond the Beltway this week. Our special guest is Ross Perot, who is the head of the Reform Party, talking about his plans for the rest of this year. When will we see the Reform Party sort of bloom and blossom and hear people talk about it on the national shows?
It's blooming and blossoming right now. We had to start in September because the two parties do not want a new party. They control every state house in the country, and some of these states have very early deadlines. For example, in California, we had to finish in September. California normally takes 2 years to create a party. We did it in 18 days. That tells you a little bit about the enthusiasm.
Is there no one on the political horizon in the Republican Party or the president? Obviously, you're doing this. You know what the president's going to do. You know what Bob Dole is going to do, some of the more known quantities in the Republican Party. But what about someone like a Steve Forbes or a Lamar Alexander, people that you may not know or the public may not know a great deal about at the moment? Do they not have the capacity to deal with the issues that are important to you?
Our party has one filter that everything has to go through. We will only do what is in the best interest of our country. And we have said repeatedly that if George Washington II suddenly appears running on either of the two parties, somebody of great quality, and we cannot produce a candidate of better quality, then we will use the fact that we are organized and provide a massive swing vote to help that candidate.
Does Lamar?
But I can't forecast. We'll have to
No,
I can't get into personalities, and all I will do is...
Do you know what Lamar Alexander stands for?
I think I have a sense of it because I have known him for a long time, and I have watched him for a long time, and I think I have a good sense of what he stands for.
Which is?
Now, let me say this about Lamar Alexander. Lamar Alexander is one of the few who has talked about the issues and not attacked other candidates. I find it fascinating that in Iowa he suddenly blooms and goes way up the poll. Don't you?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's because the people in Iowa got sick of all the dirty tricks and the negative campaigning and the propaganda. And there was one guy just working the problem.
Steve Forbes, for much of the last 8 weeks, has sort of defined the political playing field in the Republican primary by talking about the flat tax. And there's been a discussion of his idea, whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. I know you don't think it's a very good idea. And you, in 1992, you were able to define the debate in the general election, and you were the one that hammered away on the importance of the deficit and a balanced budget, which has really defined the political debate in the country for the last 4 years. You said during the speech today at the Executive Club, you think that there should be, tax reform. What specific tax reforms would you like to recommend? Give us a tax simplification program as defined by Ross Perot.
First, I think we need to develop a consensus that we need a new tax system. I gave the history of the United States tax system today at my luncheon. I will briefly do it now. Now, the reason I'm doing this is when you get ready to change something, you need to learn from history. You need to study and analyze everything you've experienced and benefit from that. And then you need to carefully and listen to everybody's different points of view in a free society. And here's the exciting thing about taxes. It's numbers. They're logical. 2 plus 2 is 4 all day. And the wind tunnel that to use an analogy, if you were going to build an airplane, you'd put a model of that airplane in the wind tunnel to make sure it would fly. To make sure your new tax system will work, you can use the computer as a wind tunnel and do simulations and have actuaries and people with the skills to do this. And when you finish, you know what it will and won't do, and you know how it impacts every citizen based on his or her pay. Now, that's the way you make things work, not just go around saying flat tax, flat tax, flat tax. Ooh, again, no paper, no plane, so on and so forth. If you look at the numbers from people who have done analysis of the flat tax, it drops tax revenues $200 billion a year at a time when we have a deficit, and it doesn't generate the money you need. So if you put it in the wind tunnel, it won't fly.
If you have Washington now suggesting, and the mood of the Republicans is to push as much of responsibility back on the states, do you not then run into a problem, perhaps complicating a problem, by having 50 different wind tunnels in welfare reform and 50 different wind tunnels in health care and Medicare? I mean, can't you create much more chaos than we even have now if we have 50 different incubators trying to solve problems?
History teaches us, and you can go back to the original democracies, that each time you pass a law, you give up part of your freedom. So make sure that the benefits you get from the law is worth the freedom you give up. It also teaches us irrevocably that when you have a local problem, pass a local law. If you have a state problem, pass a state law. And when all else fails, pass a federal law, because you're getting further and further away from the problem. Only in America would we have had the Clinton crime package. And we scooped money up from all over the United States and took it to Washington. And then we distributed it as pork after wasting a lot of it in Washington. And you know who one of the biggest recipients of the Clinton crime package was? Is one of the most crime-laden cities in the world, Little Rock, Arkansas. You'd think, well, it's got to be New York, it's got to be L.A., it's got to be Philadelphia, it's got to be Detroit. Little Rock, Arkansas got a huge amount, and there was a little town in California that got $125,000. And they called Washington and said, well, we didn't ask for any. And they said, but we're sending you $125,000 because you got a prominent congressman. Let me finish this. And they say, but we have to put up $25,000 to get that. And they said, but that's a small price to pay. We'll say, first, we don't have a police force here in the town, and the total budget to run the city is only $10,000. I hope I've made a compelling argument to try to keep government down where the people are and not move it all to Washington, because we tried it, it didn't work. You go back through the history of the tax system. When we were colonies, the average citizen was paying 67 cents a year. Right after we became a country, the average citizen was paying $1 a year in taxes. 120 years later, in 1910, the average citizen paid $6.75 in taxes. Then in 1913, we passed the income tax law. This is a compelling reason to change it. And by at that time, you were paying the $6.75. Then in the year 1929, see, just 16 years later, we'd gone to $20. And now in 1995, it's $5,700 a year for every man, woman, and child in the United States, and the standard of living has dropped for 4 out of 5 working Americans. Big government didn't work, Bruce.
What can be done to alleviate, I think, the greatest fear in the country is not of crime. It's the fear of losing your job. Right. It's the fear of financial devastation. It is the fear experienced by those who made it through the Depression, but it is expanded to a younger generation that only can read about the Depression. Exactly. People may have hundreds of thousands of dollars in the bank, but it's not enough. Right. They think they're going to live longer than their bank account. Yet we live in a global economy. What can be done, if anything, can be done from the governmental perspective to say to corporations that you have to protect your profits, return profits to your investors, reasonable margins to your investors, and yet you also have to be cognizant of the fact that your workers have got to survive. They've got to be paid a decent wage. They've got to be provided some sort of benefits. They have to be provided some sort of an economic safety net, if you will. No, can you do it? Can you make that absolutely compelling case?
Oh, first you need, for example, if you and I had to go in for heart surgery tonight, we'd look for heart surgeons, right? If you want to know how to keep jobs and create jobs in the USA, you better get guys around that have created jobs. And the folks in Washington typically have never created a job, don't understand job creation. We have got to keep a strong, dynamic, growing middle class in this country in order to have the tax base, no matter what the system is, to balance the budget and pay the debt. If you ship
but
these
what about
jobs
those that supported? What about those that supported NAFTA? I mean,
well,
the creators of NAFTA were
these guys
business people, were they not?
They all had fancy degrees. There's one economist years ago that came up with these theories. They teach them in all the fancy schools, and somehow they ought to remember the law of gravity. Water flows downhill. Jobs will flow to cheap labor. For example, we got more people working in government now than we have in manufacturing in the United States. That's a sad commentary. The best jobs for working people are in manufacturing. What happened to all of our manufacturing jobs?
How do you stop it, though? Again, I was looking at the Executives Club today. You looked at that dais that you were on. They probably all fell off the chair when you talked about NAFTA.
You're stuck with an engineer who likes to take people through the steps. You've got to have the jobs here. We agree on that. But we've now had this compulsion to go open the gates to the cheapest labor in the world. We're down to 7 million manufacturing jobs here. A Mexican worker works at about 10% of what a U.S. worker makes. After 4 years, a Mexican worker is 90% as productive as a U.S. worker. Mexican workers are treated like dirt. They live literally in shacks with dirt floors, no outhouses, no running water next to these big U.S. plants. There's no pollution or environmental controls. They pump it in the air. They pump it into the Rio Grande River. You can almost walk across the Rio Grande, most polluted river in the world. Now keep in mind, I sit here with all these environmentalists, including the vice president, say they've taken all these problems out of the USA, right? The environmental problems. But they're dumping them in a river that runs along our border, and they've forgotten the fact that normally the wind blows from the south, from Mexico, and it's blowing into Texas. Maine never had the industry, but they got the acid rain, right? Now we're down to how things really work. Here is what we can do, and here's what our country should do. We're the biggest market in the world for goods and services. We are the magic spot everybody wants to come to because our people can buy things. Why can they buy things? They have good jobs. If we take good jobs away from them, they won't be able to buy anything. We won't be the market. But while we're still king of the hill, we can go to the rest of the world and say in a very kind and gentle way, anything you want to make, anything you want to sell in the good old USA to any country in the world, we'd be delighted to have you, but make it here.
Okay. Ross Perot is our guest. We will be back with one more segment with Mr. Perot in a couple of minutes.
Everybody on the floor, stand by.
New York.
Thanks. You too. Or mic is up.
A 2-alarm fire sent 4 people to the hospital in suburban Montana.
Back to the city council where there is war on crime and a war on drugs.
At the Museum of Broadcast Communications, you can anchor your own newscast. A video cassette of it can be yours for only $19.95. For more info, visit the Museum of Broadcast Communications at Chicago's Cultural Center or call 629-6000.
Julie Parcells, patient, Cancer Treatment Centers of America.
I knew what I wanted when I was 8 years old, to play in a symphony orchestra. It took years of practice, but I made it. When I was 24, I joined the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra. But in 1988, it looked like all I worked for might end. I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I was terrified. Then I found a cancer treatment program I could believe in, one that offered more than the latest treatment methods. It used nutrition to strengthen the immune system, treated the whole person, not just the cancer, and gave me the stamina to keep playing.
Find out how we can help you. Call Cancer Treatment Centers of America, 1-800-296-9333, 1-800-296-9333.
I found cancer treatment centers, and I've treasured every concert since.
Sometimes we feel like talking, and sometimes not. Ameritech caller ID can help. Just watch.
Caller ID from Ameritech lets you answer now or call back later.
You want to talk to your Aunt Betty?
Not at this particular moment.
Call now and try caller ID free for 30 days. Because as much as we love our Aunt Bettys, sometimes we just don't want to talk.
What a week.
Caller ID lets you decide when to take a call. And when you buy a caller ID display, it helps you return calls by remembering the names and numbers of your last 60 callers. If you call Ameritech, you can try caller ID service free for 30 days. It's just one of the ways Ameritech can make your life simpler, and it's free, if you call now.
Ameritech, your link to better communication.
It's only a little motor oil.
What difference is one drop of paint gonna make?
This much fertilizer isn't gonna pollute anything.
You're looking at a sea of excuses, created drop by people like you and me. Our waters can be saved if each of us does their part. Drop by drop. If we all do a little, we can do a lot. Brought to you by the Natural Resources Defense Council, the EPA, and the Ad Councils of the U.S. and Japan.
We continue now with our special guest, Ross Perot. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. And we've been talking about issues and talking about what's going to transpire with the Reform Party a little bit later on in the year when you're going to be up and going in all 50 states, and we'll have determined when is your convention going to be where you're going to select your...
We want to have it Labor Day weekend.
Labor Day weekend.
Working folks have several days off, then we'll have it in one place, but we'll rent auditoriums across the country.
Great.
So you can go down the street, we'll satellite it down to the auditorium.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't leave the house because you're ill or what have you, hopefully we'll have it on C-SPAN. Everybody will have a ballot. They'll identify the congressman, the senator, and the presidential candidate. We'll add those up, and those will be the people we endorse for the House and Senate, and that will be the candidate we support for the president.
There is a report that you will personally spend $150 million post-Labor Day to carry the message of the nominee of that party. Is that true?
Where in the world did that come from?
Came from my lips.
Okay.
To your ears.
I know, but what's the source? That must have been from somebody that inherited money. I started out working when I was 6, and we spend money very carefully.
Will you spend that amount of money to make your case and make the case for your candidate?
Yeah, but that would be a ridiculous amount to spend. But the point is,
can
there's probably
you do it on the cheap?
luckier man alive in this country than I am. And I simply cannot just sit here and live the good life looking at the facts and the numbers that I understand and looking at the direction that our country is headed and not try to do everything I can as a citizen to correct it for our children and grandchildren, to make the 21st century the best century in our history. All my parents ever did was work and sacrifice.
Does everything you can. You just said you'd be willing to do anything you
I will sweep the streets, cut the grass, take out the trash.
Would you sign
That's
a check?
That's a big load.
Would you sign a check for $150 million?
Wouldn't make any sense, no.
Okay, you wouldn't do that.
Well, no, but again, all it takes is one goofy person with no basis for saying it to make that statement. It gets in print, and suddenly it's a fact. Keep in mind, let's go back to 92.
How much do you think it would cost?
Let me just give you an example.
Okay.
In 1992, in the summer of 92, each of the two parties had spent over $20 million or $25 million in a piece in their primaries. That's individual candidates. We were rocking and almost done, and we'd spent less than $2 million. When you're spending your own money, you clean it up. A political convention cost $20 or $30 million. We held a 3-day event in Dallas that was comparable to a political convention in terms of the facilities and so on and so forth.
It was better. Nobody fell asleep.
Spent $600,000. Follow me? Now, if that's, we spend money as a precious commodity. We don't just throw money away. So we wouldn't spend it that way, believe me.
Do you have a figure that you think that you would need to carry the message?
Spend as little as possible to get the job done. And here's the thing I've learned. See, I started with nothing. I had to compete with IBM from day one. They had all the money. And I found that brains, wits, and creative abilities of people will beat big money 10 times out of 10. I could write a book on incredible ideas. We took them head to head and beat them again and again and again and again. And we had no business even being able to compete. But it was the brains, wits, and creative ability of talented people, many of them very young people.
I am one who believes, and I've said on this program for the last over 4 years, that in my assessment, that in 1992, had you stayed in the race, you would be the President of the United States today.
More important
Do you, Mr. Perot, have you ever regretted what you did when you dropped out in 1992?
No, I did what I had to do. We had things that had to be taken care of. They were taken care of. The whole time that I stepped aside, we worked night and day to get the petitions finished. I came back in and we ran hard. Now, let's talk about why I wasn't elected president on a factual basis rather than a theoretical basis. Let's go to facts.
You said you had to do what you had to do.
Yes.
Could you elaborate? What is it that you had to do at that point?
I've covered all that many, many times. Basically, we had suddenly, I was busy in the field. We had created an organization of paid political professionals who were just totally destructive. I had to get rid of them. I'm not even sure who they were working for in retrospect. Be that as it may, we had to take care of that. And we had all of these really complicated dirty tricks things going on around my family. And I had one situation I didn't want my family to be exposed to or vulnerable to. One option I had was just to step aside, get that over with, come back, get the place cleaned up, come back in. That's exactly what we did. But now, let's go to why I wasn't elected. And all of the exit polls tell that story graphically, and it's one of the better kept secrets in the country. I never said anything about it until we were doing the petition drive in California, and suddenly the Republican Party jumped up and ran 1 minute ad saying all they'll do is get Bill Clinton elected in 1996. And I said, okay, let's go look at the facts. Let's give full credit to whom credit is due. Whoever elected Bill Clinton as president deserves 100% of the credit. All of the exit polls show that if everybody who had wanted to vote for me had voted his conscience or her conscience and had not been influenced by nonstop propaganda, the Republican Party in the last few weeks of the campaign saying, don't waste your vote on Perot, I would have gotten 40% of the vote, Bill Clinton would have gotten 31% of the vote, and George Bush would have gotten 27% of the vote. Those are the facts. Those polls are there. They're just like a stake in the ground. Nobody wants to talk about the truth, but let me tell you the end of the story, as Paul Harvey would say. They pulled that ad in California, the Republicans went underground, and I haven't heard a word about it since. Now, that's the real truth, folks.
But if you listen to radio talk, as I know you do, you will periodically hear people say that you elected Bill Clinton.
Well, that's because they're parroting the Republican propaganda. I can't stop that. It's free society. But I just gave you facts.
That I know you cannot do, but you have to know that there are people out there that may believe that, even though your interpretation of the facts is that did not happen.
Excuse me. Wait a minute. That's not my interpretation of the facts. Those are the facts. You're quoting the propaganda. The facts from the exit polls show in black and white that it was, don't waste your vote on manipulated by that. And what we've got to do is get the American voter more sophisticated than being manipulated by Willie Horton ads, don't waste your vote ads, or watch my lips, no new taxes ads. We've got to get far above that, or we're going to have a government we don't trust and respect forever.
If that is the fact, and that is the reality.
It is the fact.
Okay. If that is the fact, and that is the reality, you also know, because of the theater and the magic and the illusion, that there is perception out there. And my question is, as someone who is actively involved in planning a presidential campaign, if not for yourself, for someone who believes as you believe, are you fearful in any way that somehow that you have become a threat to these forces that stopped you for whatever reason in 1992, and they will stop you again in 1996?
They will try. They will try, but see, I understand how the game is played now.
Okay, so you learned the lesson in 92.
No, I now understand what's going on. And I think that we will be more than capable of handling those problems, and most of the people who start them will wish they hadn't when the dust clears.
Do you feel, when you analyze what happened in 92, do you think that there were plants on your campaign that tried to scuttle it?
Who knows? Who knows?
But I mean, does your gut tell you that? I mean,
no, that's not even worth talking about. All I know is when people show up that have telephone numbers that computers are tied to. I didn't even know the number existed. I looked at it and I said, I don't think we have that number. I called the people that run the telephone system. They said, oh, yeah, the computers are tied to that number. Detailed floor plans of my office, and on and on and on and on and on, and tapes of people in high places, you know, who had identified themselves by name over the phone, and on and on and on. And finally, when I stepped aside and I had a who's who of both parties begging me for to support them, and I said, not until we get this issue straight. And we're talking about household names that I was talking to, and guess what? They would disappear and never discuss it. I said, here are the names, here are the people, here are their telephone numbers in your campaign headquarters. All I want to know is, did they do this or not? Now, let's assume that I called you and said, you know, did you run over my cat last night? And you didn't, you'd say no, right? They just disappear and never come back with an answer. So I would guess the strongest signal I got is that people at the very top of the poll, when I would raise those issues, would just disappear and go into a tunnel.
Ross Perot, I thank you very much for joining us on Beyond the Beltway this evening. I hope this is the first of many visits, and we appreciate your visit
I
to
look
Chicago.
forward to it. Thank you. It was fun.
Thanks very much. Ross Perot, who is the founder and the leader and the chief cook and bottle washer of the Reform Party, which will be announcing around Labor Day who their choice for President of the United States is going to be. And we thank him very much for joining us on Beyond the Beltway this evening. This program is a Genevieve production, produced in association with WLS Talk Radio in Chicago. Our thanks to Stephanie Nelson, Tom Vera Cruz, and Chris Carr, who helped make this program possible. We will return next week at the same time. Until then, this is Bruce Dumont. So long from Chicago.